The water rushed like a furious serpent beneath the broken wheels of the stagecoach as Eleanor Evans clung desperately to the windowsill. Her knuckles white with strain, her breath coming in terrified gasps. The swollen river had appeared without warning, the crossing that should have been shallow now a raging torrent after 3 days of unrelenting spring rain. The horses screamed, the driver shouted, and then came the sickening lurch as the coach tipped sideways into the churning waters of the Powder River. Wyoming Territory, 1876. Eleanor had been traveling to meet her uncle in Deadwood after the death of her parents in St. Louis. At 22, she had few options beyond the charity of relatives, and her uncle's gold claim offered the promise of a new beginning. Now, as water began flooding the coach, that future seemed to be washing away with the current. "Hold tight," shouted Mrs. Palmer, the banker's wife who had been her traveling companion, as she clutched her young son against her chest. The other passengers, a traveling salesman named Mr. Guffey and a nervous minister, Reverend Holcomb, were bracing themselves against the tilting interior as water rushed in through the door. The coach driver and shotgun guard had disappeared in the initial tumble, leaving the 5 passengers trapped in the rapidly sinking vehicle. Eleanor felt the coach shift again, tilting further into the river. Through the window, she caught sight of a lone figure on horseback racing toward the river's edge. Even through the spray and chaos, she could see he was moving with purpose, his duster flapping behind him like the wings of a hawk. Ethan Turner had been trailing the stagecoach for the better part of the day, not following exactly, just happening to travel the same route from Fort Laramie toward the goldfields of the Black Hills. A cowboy between jobs, he'd spent the last 3 years working cattle drives across the Wyoming plains. When the cattle business slowed, he'd heard rumors of easy money in the mining towns. Those rumors had put him on this trail, riding a few miles behind the Deadwood-bound stage. When he heard the commotion ahead, the crash, the screams, the terrified whinnying of horses, he spurred his mount forward, cresting a hill to see the stagecoach capsizing in what should have been a simple river crossing. Without hesitation, Ethan leaped from his horse, stripping off his gun belt and heavy coat. The river was running high and fast from the spring rains, turning what was normally a gentle ford into a dangerous torrent. The stagecoach was tipping precariously, half submerged, with faces visible at the windows. "Help us!" came a woman's cry, nearly lost in the roar of the water. Ethan plunged into the icy river, the cold shocking his body as he fought against the current. Years of breaking wild horses had given him strength, but the river tested every ounce of it as he battled toward the slowly sinking coach. Inside, Eleanor felt the vehicle lurch again. Water was now up to her waist, and Mrs. Palmer's little boy was crying in terror. Through the window, she could see the cowboy swimming powerfully toward them, his face set with determination. "He's coming to help," she called to the others, trying to instill hope where panic threatened to overwhelm them. The stagecoach shifted again, and water rushed in faster. The Reverend lost his footing and went under briefly before Eleanor and Mr. Guffey managed to pull him back up, sputtering and gasping. Outside, Ethan reached the coach and pulled himself to the window where Eleanor's face was visible. Their eyes met hers wide with fear, his narrowed with resolve. In that moment, something passed between them, something deeper than the danger surrounding them. "Madam," he said, his voice steady despite the exertion, "I need you to help me get everyone out. This coach is going over any minute." Eleanor nodded, finding her courage in his certainty. "There are 5 of us. Mrs. Palmer has a child." Ethan nodded grimly. "Pass the child out first." Mrs. Palmer sobbed but pushed her son toward the window. The boy, no more than 6, was trembling violently as Ethan took him in his arms. "I've got him," Ethan assured her. "Hold tight, I'll be right back." Swimming with one arm, holding the boy clear of the water with the other, Ethan fought his way back to the shore. The child clung to him, small fingers digging into his shoulder. On reaching the bank, Ethan set the boy down. "Stay right here," he instructed firmly. "I'm going back for your mama." Without waiting for a response, he plunged back into the river. The stagecoach had sunk deeper, and the current was pushing against it with growing force. Time was running short. When he reached the coach again, Eleanor was helping Mrs. Palmer position herself at the window. The woman was heavy-set and frightened, making the task difficult. "Your son is safe on the shore," Ethan told her, reaching up to grasp her arms. "Now it's your turn." With Eleanor pushing from inside and Ethan pulling from the river, they managed to extract Mrs. Palmer through the window. She gasped and flailed as the cold water enveloped her. "I can't swim," she cried in panic. "You don't need to," Ethan said firmly. "Just hold on to me and keep your head above water." The journey back to shore was slower this time, Mrs. Palmer's weight and panic making the crossing treacherous. By the time Ethan deposited her safely on the riverbank beside her son, the stagecoach had shifted again, now almost completely on its side in the water. Eleanor watched anxiously as Ethan swam back toward them for the third time. The water inside the coach was now chest-high, and Reverend Holcomb was mumbling prayers between chattering teeth. "Reverend," Eleanor said decisively, "you'll go next." The minister nodded weakly. He was an older man, perhaps 50, with a thin frame that was already shivering violently from the cold. When Ethan reached the window again, his face showed the strain of his repeated battles with the current, but his eyes remained determined. "Who's next?" he called. "The Reverend," Eleanor replied, helping guide the trembling man to the window. Getting the minister out was easier than Mrs. Palmer, but more difficult than the child. Once free of the coach, Reverend Holcomb proved a passive passenger, allowing Ethan to tow him to shore without resistance. As Ethan deposited the minister on the bank, he noticed the stagecoach shifting dramatically in the water. The current was pushing it further downstream, threatening to tear it completely from its already precarious position. "Watch them," he shouted to the Reverend, indicating Mrs. Palmer and her son before diving back into the river. Inside the coach, Eleanor and Mr. Guffey were now standing in water that reached their shoulders. The salesman's normally ruddy face had gone pale with fear. "It's shifting, Miss Evans," he said, his voice quavering. "We haven't much time." Eleanor nodded, feeling the coach move beneath them. "He's coming back," she said, trying to sound confident as she peered through the window for any sign of their rescuer. When Ethan finally appeared at the window, his face was grim. "The coach is breaking free," he said urgently. "Sir, you're next, and we need to hurry." Mr. Guffey needed no second invitation, practically lunging toward the window in his eagerness to escape. He was a portly man, and extracting him through the narrow opening proved difficult. Eleanor pushed while Ethan pulled, both straining against the man's bulk. Just as they managed to free him, the stagecoach lurched violently. Eleanor was thrown back against the opposite wall, her head striking wood with enough force to momentarily daze her. Water surged through the coach, now nearly filling the interior. Outside, Ethan saw the coach begin to roll. With one powerful kick, he pushed Mr. Guffey toward the shore. "Swim," he shouted. "Straight for the bank." The salesman flailed, but managed to move in the right direction while Ethan turned back to the coach. He could see Eleanor inside, struggling to regain her footing as the vehicle continued to shift. With a powerful dive, he forced himself through the window just as the coach rolled completely onto its roof. Inside, the world had turned upside down. Water filled most of the space, leaving only a small pocket of air at what had been the floor, but was now the ceiling. Eleanor was gasping, trying to keep her head in that diminishing air space. Ethan reached her in 2 powerful strokes. "Take a deep breath," he commanded. Their eyes met again, and in that moment, Eleanor felt an inexplicable trust in this stranger who had already saved 4 lives. She nodded, filled her lungs, and felt his strong arm encircle her waist. Together, they plunged into the water, Ethan guiding them through the window and into the open river. The current immediately caught them, sweeping them downstream away from the now fully submerged coach. Eleanor felt her lungs burning as Ethan kicked powerfully, fighting to bring them to the surface. When they finally broke through, she gasped desperately for air, coughing as water had found its way into her mouth. Ethan's arm remained firm around her waist as he began swimming toward the shore with his free arm. "I can swim," she managed between breaths. "Good," he replied, his own breathing labored. "Stay with me." Side by side, they fought the current, gradually making their way toward the bank where the other passengers huddled, watching anxiously. By the time they reached shallow water, Eleanor's limbs felt like lead, her sodden dress weighing her down like an anchor. Ethan's hand found hers, helping her up the slippery bank until they both collapsed on solid ground. For several minutes, no one spoke. The only sounds were heavy breathing, Mrs. Palmer's son's quiet sobbing, and the continued rush of the river that had nearly claimed their lives. The stagecoach was now completely gone, carried downstream by the relentless current. Eleanor finally turned to look at their rescuer properly. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 27 or 28. His dark hair was plastered to his head, water dripping from a strong jawline that held a day's worth of stubble. His eyes, she now saw, were a deep blue that reminded her of the summer sky back in St. Louis. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing the words were wholly inadequate for what he had done. Ethan nodded, pushing himself to a sitting position. "Ethan Turner," he said, extending a hand that still trembled slightly from exertion and cold. "Eleanor Evans," she replied, taking his hand briefly. His grip was firm despite his exhaustion. The introductions seemed to break the spell of shock that had held the group. Mrs. Palmer began fussing over her son, wringing water from his clothes. Reverend Holcomb resumed his prayers, now offering thanks rather than desperate pleas. Mr. Guffey simply stared at the river, perhaps contemplating how close he had come to ending his life in its depths. "What now?" Eleanor asked, looking around at the wilderness surrounding them. The stagecoach stop was still many miles ahead, and they had lost everything: luggage, supplies, even the horses. Ethan rose to his feet, surveying their situation with a practical eye. "My horse is just up the hill," he said. "We can use him to carry the boy and anyone who can't walk. There's a settlement about 10 miles downstream. We can reach it before nightfall if we start now." 10 miles, Mrs. Palmer exclaimed, clutching her son tighter. "In these wet clothes?" "Better than spending the night out here," Ethan replied matter-of-factly. "The temperature drops fast once the sun goes down, and wet as we are, that could be dangerous." Eleanor stood up, wringing water from her skirts. "Mr. Turner is right," she said firmly. "We need to keep moving." She turned to the cowboy, finding strength in his calm competence. "Lead the way, sir. We'll follow." The journey to the settlement was arduous. Mrs. Palmer and her son rode double on Ethan's patient horse, while the rest of them walked. Their wet clothes chafed and grew heavy, and the spring sun wasn't warm enough to dry them completely. Eleanor's boots squished with every step, and she could feel blisters forming on her heels and toes. Yet there was also a strange exhilaration in having survived, in walking through this wild country with its vast horizons and endless sky. Occasionally, her eyes would meet Ethan's as he glanced back to check on the group, and each time she felt a peculiar warmth despite her damp, cold clothing. As they walked, they talked. Eleanor learned that Ethan had grown up in Missouri, the son of a farmer who had lost everything in the war. He'd headed west at 18, working as a cowhand, a horsebreaker, occasionally a scout for the army. Now, at 28, he was heading to the Black Hills to try his luck in the gold fields. "Not much future in cowboying," he explained as they walked side by side, the others a few paces ahead or behind. "Not for a man with no herd of his own." "And you think there's a future in gold mining?" she asked. He shrugged, a slight smile lifting the corner of his mouth. "Probably not. But it's something different. A man can't ride the same trail forever." "No," she agreed, thinking of her own journey. I suppose he can't. By the time they reached the settlement, little more than a trading post, a stable, and a handful of rough cabins, the sun was low in the sky, painting the clouds in shades of orange and pink. The proprietor of the trading post, a gruff man named Hansen, grudgingly provided them with blankets and a place by his fire. His wife, a kind-faced woman with work-roughened hands, brought out bowls of stew and mugs of hot coffee. Stage went into the river, eh? Hansen said, chewing thoughtfully on his pipe. That crossing's been trouble since the rain started. Told the company they ought to suspend service till it goes down, but nobody listens to old Hansen. The driver and guard, Ethan asked. Any sign of them? Hansen shook his head grimly. Not yet. Got some boys out looking, but... He let the sentence trail off, but his meaning was clear. The river had likely claimed them. Eleanor felt a shiver that had nothing to do with her damp clothes. She had been so focused on her own survival that she hadn't given much thought to the two men who had been on top of the coach. Now, the reality of their probable fate cast a shadow over her relief at having survived. Nothing to be done about it tonight, Hansen's wife said practically. You all need dry clothes and rest. We've got a cabin for the ladies and boy, and the men can sleep in the stable loft. As the group began to disperse for the night, Eleanor found herself reluctant to part from Ethan. He had been her anchor through this ordeal, a steady presence amidst chaos. She watched as he spoke quietly with Hansen, presumably making arrangements for the morning, and felt an unexpected pang at the thought that he might continue on his way, leaving them behind. As if sensing her gaze, he turned, their eyes meeting across the room. He nodded once, a gesture that somehow conveyed both reassurance and a promise. They would talk tomorrow. With that understanding, Eleanor followed Mrs. Hansen to the cabin, carrying the now sleeping Palmer boy so his exhausted mother could walk unencumbered. The next morning dawned clear and cool, the storm system that had caused the river's flooding having moved eastward. Eleanor, dressed in a borrowed dress that was too short and too wide but blissfully dry, emerged from the cabin to find Ethan already up, splitting wood outside the trading post with powerful, efficient strokes. He paused when he saw her, setting the axe aside and wiping his brow. Miss Evans, he greeted her, his voice warm. Sleep well, better than I expected, she admitted. And you? Well enough, he gestured toward the trading post. Hansen's wife is making breakfast, the others are already inside. As they walked together, Eleanor broached the subject that had been on her mind. What happens now, to all of us, I mean? Ethan considered the question. Hansen says another stage will come through in 3 days. He sent word about what happened. The company will likely arrange transportation for you all to continue your journeys. 3 days, Eleanor repeated, feeling both relief at the solution and an odd disappointment at how quickly their paths would diverge again. And you, will you wait for the stage as well? He shook his head. No need, I've got my horse, I'll likely head out today. Oh. She couldn't keep the disappointment from her voice. Of course, you have your own plans. Ethan stopped walking, turning to face her directly. Miss Evans, Eleanor, if I may, yesterday wasn't exactly how I planned to make your acquaintance, but I can't say I regret meeting you. His directness surprised her, but she found herself responding in kind. Nor I you, Mr. Turner, though I wish it had been under less dire circumstances. A smile tugged at his mouth. Ethan, please. Ethan, she repeated, liking the way his name felt on her lips. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of connection that went beyond the shared trauma of the previous day. Eleanor felt her cheeks warm under his steady gaze. Before either could speak again, the trading post door opened, and Reverend Holcomb stepped out, breaking the moment. Ah, Miss Evans, Mr. Turner, Mrs. Hansen has breakfast ready. She insists we eat while it's hot. Throughout breakfast, Eleanor found her attention repeatedly drawn to Ethan. He spoke little, answering questions when asked, but otherwise content to listen as the others discussed their plans. Mr. Guffey was adamant about continuing to Deadwood as soon as possible. "I've got appointments, valuable merchandise orders to take," he insisted, as if someone had suggested he abandon his journey entirely. Mrs. Palmer was less certain. "Perhaps we should return to Fort Laramie," she said quietly. "After what happened, it seems like a bad omen for our journey." "Nonsense," Mr. Guffey replied dismissively. "Stage accidents happen. Can't let a little water change your plans." Eleanor remained silent, considering her own options. Her uncle was expecting her, true, but he barely knew her. Their connection was tenuous at best. Her mother's brother, whom she had met only twice in her life. Would he even notice if she never arrived? After breakfast, as the others dispersed to sort through the few possessions they had managed to salvage or to rest further, Eleanor found Ethan outside again, this time checking his horse's tack. "Are you leaving soon?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. He nodded, adjusting a strap on his saddle. "Thought I'd head out before noon, make some miles while the day's still young." Eleanor took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I've been thinking about what you said about trying gold mining." He looked up, curious. "What about it?" "My uncle, the one I was traveling to meet in Deadwood, he has a claim there. That's why I was going, to live with him, to help keep house." She hesitated. "But I don't really know him, and after yesterday, it's made me think about what I really want." Ethan straightened, giving her his full attention. "And what is it you want, Eleanor?" The directness of his question momentarily took her breath away. What did she want? She had been following others' expectations for so long, her parents', and now her uncle's, that she had scarcely considered the question herself. "I want," she began slowly. "I want not to be afraid. I want to make my own choices. I want to see more of this country before I settle anywhere." She met his gaze steadily. "And I think I would like to know you better, Ethan Turner." His expression remained unreadable for a moment, then softened into a smile that transformed his face. "That's quite a list. Too much?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. "No," he said, his voice gentle. "Not too much at all." He gestured to the vast landscape around them. "But this country isn't kind to solitary women. Your uncle can receive a letter explaining my change of plans," she interrupted. "I'm 22 years old, Ethan, old enough to make my own decisions." He studied her for a long moment, seeming to weigh something in his mind. "There's a town about 60 miles north of here," he said finally. "Benton, it's small but growing. Has a hotel that might need help, last I heard. Respectable work for a woman on her own." Eleanor felt a flicker of disappointment. "You're suggesting I go there instead of Deadwood?" "I'm suggesting," he said carefully, "that I could escort you there. It's not far out of my way to the Black Hills. You could find work, get settled. And I could check in on you when my business in Deadwood is done." "Check in on me," she repeated, a smile beginning to form. As a friend, his eyes held hers, and she saw in them the same connection she had felt since that first moment in the river. "To start with," he said softly. "If that's agreeable to you." Eleanor felt her heart quicken. This was madness, surely changing her plans completely, putting her trust in a man she had known for barely a day. And yet, something about it felt right in a way her original plans never had. "It's agreeable," she said, her decision made. "When do we leave?" The next hours passed in a flurry of preparations. Eleanor wrote a letter to her uncle, explaining her change of plans and assuring him she was safe and well. Mrs. Hanson helped her gather a few necessities, a spare dress, basic toiletries, a warm shawl for the cool evenings. The other passengers reacted to her news with varying degrees of surprise and concern. Reverend Holcomb was particularly vocal, urging her to reconsider what he called a rash decision. "A young woman of good family, traveling alone with a strange man," he said, his voice low but intense. "It's simply not done, Miss Evans. Consider your reputation." "I'm considering my life, Reverend," she replied firmly. "Mr. Turner saved all of us yesterday, at great risk to himself. I trust him to see me safely to Benton." Mrs. Palmer was more understanding, perhaps recognizing in Eleanor's decision a courage she wished she herself possessed. "Write to me when you're settled," she said, embracing Eleanor before they parted. "I'll be continuing to Deadwood as planned, but I would like to know how your adventure unfolds." By noon, Eleanor was mounted behind Ethan on his sturdy gelding, her arms wrapped around his waist as they set out northward from the trading post. The position was intimate, necessarily so, and Eleanor found herself acutely aware of the solid strength of him, the way his body moved with the horse's gait. They rode in silence for the first hour, both adjusting to this new arrangement. Finally, Ethan spoke over his shoulder. "Comfortable enough?" "Yes," she replied, though in truth, the saddle was harder than she had expected, and she could already feel the beginnings of soreness in her thighs and back. "How far will we get today?" "There's a creek about 20 miles on," he said. "Good place to camp for the night. We should reach it by sunset if we maintain this pace." The word camp brought home to Eleanor the reality of what she had undertaken. Nights under the stars, days on horseback, just the two of them traversing this wild country. It was thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. "Have you done this often?" she asked. "Traveled with companions?" She felt rather than saw his smile. "Not like this," he admitted. "Usually it's just me and the horse, sometimes a pack mule if I've got extra gear." "Am I very much in the way?" She meant it lightly, but there was a genuine concern beneath the question. Ethan was quiet for a moment. "No," he said finally, "you're not in the way at all." The simple statement warmed her more than she expected. They fell back into comfortable silence, the rhythm of the horses' hooves marking time as they traveled through the vast, open country. As promised, they reached the creek just as the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. Ethan helped Eleanor dismount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. Her legs trembled as they took her weight again, unaccustomed to so many hours in the saddle. "Sore?" he asked, noticing her discomfort. "A bit," she admitted. "Nothing serious," he nodded, understanding. "It gets easier. Walking will help. Could you gather some wood for a fire while I see to the horse?" Eleanor welcomed the task, glad to have something useful to do. As she collected fallen branches near the creek, she reflected on the strangeness of her situation. Just 2 days ago, she had been a proper young lady from St. Louis, traveling to her uncle's home with all the propriety her limited means allowed. Now, she was gathering firewood in the wilderness, preparing to spend the night under the stars with a man she barely knew but trusted implicitly. By the time she returned with an armful of wood, Ethan had unsaddled the horse and set up a simple camp. He took the wood from her with a nod of thanks and quickly built a small, efficient fire. "Not too big," he explained as he worked. "No need to announce our presence to anyone passing by." The reminder that they were not entirely safe sobered Eleanor. "Are there dangers?" she asked. "Besides the natural ones, I mean," Ethan shrugged, feeding small sticks to the growing flames. "This area's mostly peaceful these days. The Sioux are further north, and most white troublemakers stick close to the settlements or the gold fields." He glanced up at her. "Still, caution's always wise." As darkness fell, they shared a simple meal of jerky, hardtack, and coffee from Ethan's provisions. The firelight cast a golden glow on their faces, creating an intimate circle of warmth in the vastness of the prairie night. "Tell me about your family," Ethan said as they finished eating, "if you don't mind talking about them." Eleanor wrapped her borrowed shawl tighter against the evening chill. "There's not much to tell. My father was a merchant, successful once, but the panic of '73 ruined him. He never really recovered his health or his business. My mother took ill last winter, and he followed her within a month." She stared into the fire. "The house, the business, everything had to be sold to cover debts. My uncle's invitation was timely." Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'm sorry for your losses." "Thank you." She looked up at him. "And your family? You mentioned your father lost everything in the war." "He fought for the Confederacy," Ethan said, a shadow crossing his face. I was too young to understand much about the politics of it. I just knew that when he came back, he was different, bitter. The farm was in ruins, and he couldn't seem to find the will to rebuild. He poked at the fire with a stick. He turned to drink. My mother held things together as best she could, but when she died of fever in '67, there wasn't much left to keep me there. So you came west, Eleanor said softly. So I came west, he agreed. Worked ranches in Texas, Kansas, Nebraska, Wyoming. Never stayed anywhere too long. Always looking for something different, she said, echoing his earlier words. He smiled slightly, meeting her eyes across the fire. Maybe, or maybe just running from the same old thing. The honesty of his admission touched her. In that moment, Eleanor felt she understood Ethan Turner better than she had understood anyone in a long time, perhaps ever. He was a man shaped by loss and independence, just as she had been shaped by duty and constraint. And now, she asked, "What are you looking for in Deadwood?" He considered the question seriously. A stake, maybe, enough money to buy some land somewhere, raise horses instead of following someone else's herd. He glanced at her. "What about you? What were you hoping to find with your uncle?" Eleanor had asked herself the same question many times on her journey. "Security, I suppose," she answered honestly. "A roof over my head that wouldn't be taken away by someone else's misfortune. But now," she hesitated. "Now I think I want more than just safety. I want to choose my own path, even if it's harder." Their eyes met again, and in that moment, something shifted between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits despite their different backgrounds. The air seemed to thicken with unspoken possibility. Ethan broke the moment first, rising to his feet. "We should get some sleep," he said, his voice a touch rougher than before. "Long day tomorrow." He arranged their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire, maintaining propriety even in these unusual circumstances. As Eleanor settled into her blankets, she watched him check the horse one last time before taking his place across the flames. "Ethan," she said softly. Thank you, not just for yesterday, but for today, for helping me find another way." In the flickering light, she saw his expression soften. "Get some rest, Eleanor. We've got a long road ahead." The journey to Benton took 3 days. 3 days of gradually increasing comfort on horseback, of learning each other's stories, of sharing the simple tasks of making and breaking camp. With each passing hour, Eleanor felt herself growing more certain of her decision, more drawn to the quiet strength of the man she traveled with. They spoke of books they had read, of places they had seen or hoped to see, of the small details that formed the fabric of their separate lives. Ethan, she discovered, had a dry wit that emerged when he was comfortable, and a passion for horses that transformed his usually reserved demeanor into animation. For her part, Eleanor shared her love of painting, a hobby she had been forced to abandon when her family's fortunes changed, and her secret childhood dream of seeing the ocean someday. "Pacific or Atlantic?" Ethan had asked. "Either, both," she'd replied with a laugh. "I just want to see something so vast that it makes even this prairie seem small." By the time they crested the final ridge and saw the scattered buildings of Benton in the valley below, Eleanor felt as if she had known Ethan for years rather than days. And yet, there remained between them an unspoken tension, a careful distance that neither had quite dared to bridge. "There it is," Ethan said, reining in his horse. "Benton, not much to look at, but it's growing fast." Eleanor studied the town from their vantage point. It was indeed modest, a main street lined with wooden buildings, a few side streets with smaller structures, a church steeple rising above the rest. Smoke curled from chimneys, and even at this distance, she could make out figures moving between the buildings. "It looks real," she said finally. "Like a place where people actually live, not just pass through." Ethan glanced at her, a question in his eyes. "I mean," she clarified, "it's not just a stopping point or a mining camp. People are building something permanent here." He nodded, understanding. "That's why I thought of it for you. It's rough around the edges, but there's a future here." As they rode into town, Eleanor became acutely aware of the stares their arrival attracted. A woman riding double with a man was unusual enough to draw attention in any Western settlement. She held her head high, reminding herself that she had nothing to be ashamed of, regardless of what local gossips might assume. They stopped first at the hotel, a 2-story wooden structure with Benton Hotel painted in large letters across its facade. The proprietor, a harried-looking man named Morris, confirmed that they did indeed need help, particularly with keeping the books and managing the small restaurant attached to the hotel. "My wife's been running herself ragged trying to do it all," he explained. "Been looking for someone with figures and letters who isn't afraid of hard work." He eyed Eleanor skeptically. "That you, miss?" "It is," she replied firmly. "I kept my father's books for years, and I'm not afraid of work, Mr. Morris." After some negotiation, it was agreed that Eleanor would begin work the following day, with room and board included as part of her compensation. Morris's wife, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes, showed Eleanor to a small but clean room on the second floor, expressing profound relief at the prospect of help. "It's not much," Mrs. Morris said apologetically, gesturing to the sparse furnishings. "But it's private and it catches the morning sun." "It's perfect," Eleanor assured her, already envisioning how she might make the space her own. After settling her few belongings, Eleanor went back downstairs to find Ethan waiting in the hotel lobby. He stood as she approached, hat in hands. "All settled?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, suddenly aware that their time together was drawing to a close. "The Morrises seem like good people," he nodded, looking around the modest lobby. "It's a decent place, you'll be safe here." An awkward silence fell between them, neither quite knowing how to say goodbye after the intimacy of their journey. "When will you leave for Deadwood?" Eleanor finally asked. "Tomorrow morning," Ethan replied. "No sense delaying." "No," she agreed, fighting a wave of disappointment. "I suppose not." Another silence, heavier this time. "Eleanor," Ethan began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with his words. "I meant what I said about checking on you when my business in Deadwood is done." She looked up at him, hope rising despite her efforts to contain it. "How long do you think that will be?" "A month, maybe 2, he said. "Depends on what I find there." "I'll be here," she said simply, "learning to be a hotel keeper." His mouth quirked in a half-smile. "You'll probably own the place by the time I get back." They dined together that evening in the hotel restaurant, both acutely aware that it was their last night in each other's company for some time. Their conversation was lighter than it had been on the trail. As if by unspoken agreement, they were avoiding topics that might deepen the connection they both felt, but weren't yet ready to acknowledge fully. As they finished their meal, Ethan reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers briefly. "I should go," he said quietly. "Early start tomorrow." Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. He walked her to the base of the hotel stairs, the proper stopping point for a man seeing a lady to her room. They stood facing each other, the hotel's dim lamps casting soft shadows. "Ethan," Eleanor said, gathering her courage. "What happened at the river, you saving us, I'll never forget it. But these past days, traveling with you," she hesitated, "those I'll remember even more." His expression softened, and he reached out, taking her hand properly this time. "I've known a lot of trails, Eleanor Evans. Never thought I'd find one I didn't want to leave behind." The simple statement held more meaning than any flowery declaration. Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes as she squeezed his hand. "Then come back," she whispered. "When you're done in Deadwood, come back and tell me about it." "I will," he promised, his voice low and certain. Then, with a gentleness that belied his strength, he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss against her knuckles. "Good night, Eleanor." "Good night, Ethan." She watched him walk away, his tall figure silhouetted against the hotel's front windows before he disappeared into the night. Only then did she climb the stairs to her new room, her heart full of an emotion she wasn't yet ready to name, but recognized nonetheless. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity as Eleanor settled into her new life in Benton. The work was demanding, keeping the hotel's books, helping in the restaurant, occasionally even cleaning rooms when they were short-handed, but she found satisfaction in it that she hadn't expected. The Morrises, once they recovered from their initial surprise at her willingness to work hard, became almost parental in their concern for her welfare. The town itself was a revelation. Unlike St. Louis, with its rigid social hierarchies, or even the smaller towns she had passed through on her journey west, Benton was a place where a person was judged more by their actions than their background. Eleanor's education and manners set her apart, but her willingness to adapt and work hard earned her respect. She made friends gradually: the young schoolteacher, Miss Whitley, the blacksmith's wife, Mrs. Donovan, even the gruff old storekeeper, Mr. Graham, who declared her the only female in town with a head for figures. Life developed a rhythm, a sense of purpose that had been missing since her parents' deaths. And always, beneath the surface of her daily activities, ran the current of anticipation. Ethan would return. He had promised, and instinctively, she knew he was a man who kept his promises. Summer faded into early autumn. The aspens on the hillsides turned golden, and the mornings grew crisp. Eleanor found herself watching the road from the hotel window more frequently, starting slightly whenever a rider appeared on the horizon. It was on such a morning, nearly 2 months after their parting, that she looked up from the ledger she was updating to see a familiar figure dismounting outside the hotel. Her heart seemed to stop, then race forward as if to make up for the missed beat. She was at the door before he reached it, stepping out onto the hotel's small porch just as he mounted the steps. They stood facing each other, the autumn sunlight illuminating every detail she had committed to memory and missed so desperately: the blue of his eyes, the set of his shoulders, the way his mouth curved when he saw her. "You're back," she said simply. "I promised I would be," he replied, his voice warm with everything they hadn't yet said aloud. There was so much to talk about: his time in Deadwood, her life in Benton, the future that suddenly seemed full of possibilities. But in that moment, words seemed inadequate. Instead, Ethan took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "Eleanor Evans," he said softly, "I've crossed half the territory thinking about what I would say when I saw you again." "And what did you decide?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. His smile deepened, reaching his eyes. "That sometimes words aren't what's needed at all." Slowly, giving her every chance to step away, he closed the distance between them. His hand came up to cup her cheek, gentle as the morning breeze. And then he was kissing her, there on the hotel porch in full view of anyone who might pass by, and Eleanor found she didn't care who saw. In that kiss was every moment since he had pulled her from the river, every conversation by firelight, every shared smile across a campfire, every unspoken feeling that had grown between them on the long road to Benton. And beneath it all, the promise of more roads to travel together. When they finally broke apart, both a little breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I didn't find gold in Deadwood," he murmured. "I'm sorry," she replied, though in truth, she felt nothing but joy in that moment. He shook his head slightly, his hand still cradling her face. "Don't be, I found something better." His eyes met hers, open and honest. "I found a reason to stop running." Eleanor smiled, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Welcome home, Ethan Turner," she said softly. "Welcome home." And as they stood together in the clear autumn light, Eleanor thought of the river that had nearly claimed her life, but had instead given her a future she could never have imagined. Sometimes, it seemed, the most unexpected currents carried you exactly where you were meant to be.